Under the lights, fists fly and blood spills. But the smartest fighters were never trying to win forever in the cage. They were trying to win once, then leave with leverage. While most fighters chased belts until their bodies broke, a few quietly studied something else: attention, ownership, timing. They understood a brutal truth early. The fight is not the product, the fighter is. And if you control the fighter, you control the money. This is the story of the men who didn't just survive the sport, they beat it. Crowds remember knockouts, but history rewards exits. For every champion who fought too long, there is a fighter who walked away early, intact, wealthy, and free. The difference was never toughness, it was intelligence. And the gap between the two paths is wider than any weight class. Because the real victory doesn't happen when the referee raises your hand. Most fighters are trained to fight men. Very few are trained to fight systems. Contracts, promoters, media narratives, public attention. These are invisible opponents that decide who eats and who fades. The majority never even see them coming. They believe winning fights is enough. It isn't. The fighters who beat the game understood something uncomfortable. Fighting is temporary. Fame is rented. But ownership is permanent. So instead of bleeding longer, they positioned earlier. Instead of begging for paydays, they created leverage. Instead of asking for permission, they made themselves unavoidable. They didn't wait for the system to reward them, they forced it to. This is not a story about being liked. It is a story about being strategic, about turning chaos into control, about understanding that every interview, every headline, every controversy is a bargaining chip if you know how to use it. And a few fighters used it better than anyone ever had. Before social media, before branding became a buzzword, Muhammad Ali understood attention as a weapon. He didn't just fight opponents, he fought narratives. He talked, provoked, predicted, and polarized. Every word made him bigger than the sport itself. Promoters didn't own Ali, audiences did. And when you own attention, you negotiate from the top. Ali turned his voice into leverage long before fighters were even allowed to think that way. He proved that being unavoidable is more powerful than being obedient. Decades later, Conor McGregor applied the same principle in a modern arena. He didn't just win fights, he sold moments. Press conferences became performances. Interviews became viral events. He understood that controversy multiplied reach, and reach multiplied power. When negotiations came, he wasn't asking for money. He was demanding a percentage of what he already generated. The sport didn't make McGregor famous. McGregor made the sport richer. And once the math was undeniable, the rules changed for him. Then there is Chael Sonnen, a fighter who didn't dominate with wins but with relevance. He understood something most champions never do. Winning fights is optional if you control the conversation. Sonnen talked himself into title shots, paydays, and a second career. Long after his last fight, his voice still prints money. He didn't win belts, he won longevity, because attention outlives athleticism. These men shared one dangerous insight. Fame is not ego fuel, it is currency. And currency, when used correctly, buys freedom. While others trained harder, they negotiated smarter. While others chased approval, they commanded interest. They weren't trying to be the best fighters forever. They were trying to be the last ones standing financially. And once you understand that attention is leverage, the entire sport looks different. The cage becomes a stage. The fight becomes advertising. And the real business begins the moment the crowd starts watching. Because the smartest fighters were never just fighting opponents. They were building power. For most fighters, the cage is a job. You show up, you perform, you take damage, and you get paid once. Someone else owns the cameras, the promotion, the brand, the future. Fighters are treated as expendable labor, powerful while useful, invisible when replaced. The smartest fighters saw this imbalance early and made a decision that separated them forever. They refused to sell only their bodies. They demanded control. They understood that whoever owns the event always beats the one risking his life inside it. No fighter executed this shift more ruthlessly than Floyd Mayweather. Floyd looked past belts and realized that promoters were building empires off fighters who would never see that money again. Instead of chasing the biggest guaranteed purse, he chased the back end. Pay-per-view points, distribution control, event ownership. When Mayweather Promotions was born, Floyd stopped being the attraction and became the business. Every fight was no longer a paycheck, it was a revenue stream. He didn't want to be paid well, he wanted to be paid last. Mayweather father understood that guaranteed money has a ceiling, ownership does not. While other champions celebrated record purses, Floyd focused on percentages. He forced networks and promoters to negotiate with him instead of around him. The sport adjusted because it had no alternative. When Floyd fought, millions moved, and he controlled where they landed. That is the difference between income and power. Years earlier, Oscar de la Hoya made the same calculation at a moment when most fighters cling to relevance. At the height of his fame, instead of signing his leverage away, he converted it. Golden Boy Promotions turned a fighter into a gatekeeper. Suddenly, de la Hoya was not just headlining cards, he was creating them. When his gloves came off, his income did not collapse. It multiplied. He didn't retire into silence, he retired into control. Ownership insulated de la Hoya from the one fate fighters fear most: irrelevance. While others chased comeback fights, he negotiated broadcast deals. While others took damage to stay visible, he stayed powerful behind the scenes. His career did not end. It evolved, because when you own the system, you never age out of it. These men understood something that most fighters never do. Promotions grow forever. Fighters do not. If you do not secure ownership while you are valuable, you will never secure it when you are not. The smartest fighters demanded equity when the world needed them most, not when the phone stopped ringing. They traded ego for leverage. Ownership forces discipline. It punishes impulsive decisions. It rewards patience. Fighters who chase purses fight longer than they should. Fighters who chase control leave earlier than expected. The difference is not courage. It is vision, knowing when you have already won. Once a fighter understands ownership, the cage changes meaning. The fight becomes marketing. The risk becomes calculated. And the end goal is no longer applause, it is freedom. Because the smartest fighters were never trying to win every fight. They were trying to win the game. The most dangerous lie in combat sports is the idea that you leave when you are finished. By the time a fighter feels finished, the damage is already done. The smartest fighters understood something most never accept. Your peak is invisible while you are living in it. Miss it, and the sport takes payment with interest. Catch it, and you leave with leverage, health, and dignity. Timing, not toughness, decides who escapes intact. No modern fighter demonstrated this better than Khabib Nurmagomedov. At the absolute height of his power, undefeated, dominant, untouchable, Khabib walked away. Not because he couldn't continue, but because he understood diminishing returns. Every extra fight added risk, not value. His brand was clean, his image controlled, his legacy complete. He exited when the world still wanted more, which is the only moment leverage exists. He didn't retire because he had to. He retired because he could. Khabib preserved something priceless: credibility. No brutal knockouts at the end, no sad comebacks, no erosion of mystique. That credibility followed him into coaching, promotion, and global business ventures. He turned discipline into enterprise and silence into authority. While others chased one more payday, he protected the asset, himself. He understood that scarcity multiplies value. Decades earlier, George Foreman mastered timing in a different way. Foreman retired once already wealthy in name, then returned not out of desperation, but strategy. His comeback wasn't about dominance, it was about relevance. He stayed long enough to refresh his brand, then exited for good. The second act wasn't about fighting at all. It was about trust. The public trusted him, and trust is the foundation of every empire. He didn't fight forever, he fought when it mattered. Foreman walked away before the sport could take more than it gave. That restraint allowed him to pivot fully into business, turning his name into a household product that out-earned his entire boxing career. He didn't cling to youth. He respected time, and time rewarded him back. He treated fighting as a chapter, not the whole book. Then there's Andre Ward, a fighter who shocked the sport by leaving early. Still skilled, still respected, still capable. Ward looked at the landscape and saw the truth. Harder fights, lower pay, higher risk. Instead of gambling his health for diminishing rewards, he stepped away, his body intact, his mind clear, his reputation untouched. He chose preservation over applause. Ward transitioned into commentary and analysis, extending his income without extending damage. His voice replaced his fists. His insight replaced his injuries. He exited before nostalgia turned into necessity. That decision alone separated him from dozens of champions who stayed too long. Because Because knowing when to stop is a form of intelligence. These fighters shared a rare discipline. They ignored ego, they ignored fan pressure, they ignored the illusion that more fights equal more legacy. They understood the invisible line where value peaks and danger explodes. Most fighters cross that line chasing pride. These men stepped back. They didn't let the sport decide when they were finished. In combat sports, the cage never tells you to leave. It only asks how much more you are willing to give. The smartest fighters answer that question early. And because they do, they leave with something most never touch: control, the ability to walk away on their own terms. When the body slows, most fighters panic. They feel the clock, the aches, the hesitation in their reactions. For many, this is where fear takes over and bad decisions follow. But the smartest fighters understood a deeper truth. Experience compounds longer than athleticism. Bruises fade, but knowledge appreciates. And if you can convert pain into insight, you can earn without bleeding. They stopped selling their bodies and started selling their minds. Chael Sonnen understood this before his career even ended. While others avoided microphones, Sonnen leaned into them. He studied narrative, timing, controversy. He spoke in complete thoughts when others hid behind cliches. Wins were optional. Relevance was not. When the cage door closed for the last time, Sonnen didn't disappear. His voice carried him into media, analysis, podcasts, and commentary. He didn't need to fight anymore. The conversation fought for him. Sonnen proved something uncomfortable for purists. You don't have to be undefeated to be valuable. You have to be understood. He turned losses into stories, rivalries into episodes, and opinions into income. His body absorbed damage, so his mind could later produce value. While others chased one more payday, Sonnen built a platform that never needed a referee. The cage aged him. His voice did not. Then there is Daniel Cormier, a man who prepared for life after fighting while still fighting. Cormier understood structure, education, stability. He never treated commentary as a backup plan, but as a parallel path. When his fighting career ended, his transition felt seamless. No desperation, no scrambling. He replaced competition with analysis and adrenaline with authority. He didn't fall into media, he stepped into it. Cormier's credibility was built on sacrifice, but his longevity came from communication. Fans trusted him because he lived the fight. Networks trusted him because he could explain it. That combination created something rare, a fighter who aged into influence instead of irrelevance. His value increased as his punches stopped. Long before fighters dreamed of platforms, Joe Rogan demonstrated the ultimate version of this transformation. Rogan was never a champion fighter, but he understood fighters better than most champions. He sat cage-side, learned the sport deeply, and became the voice of MMA itself. His knowledge, curiosity, and consistency turned proximity into power. He proved you don't need the belt to own the conversation. Rogan's success exposed a truth many fighters miss. Access is opportunity if you know how to use it. The smartest fighters don't disappear after retirement because they already built a second role while the first one was still alive. They treat fighting as research, not identity. Every camp becomes education. Every fight becomes material. They bleed once, then monetize forever. Turning pain into intellectual property requires humility. You must accept that your value is no longer in domination, but in explanation. Many fighters cannot make that shift. Ego keeps them chasing relevance through damage. The smart ones let go. They evolve. They trade violence for clarity. This is the invisible pivot, the moment when a fighter stops asking how hard he can hit and starts asking how much he understands. Those who make this shift extend their careers without extending their injuries. Those who don't keep swinging until there is nothing left to sell. Because knowledge compounds, but damage only accumulates. The smartest fighters eventually realize something that changes everything. Fighting is not a business model, it is a launch pad. The cage gives attention, but attention alone does not build security. What matters is what you attach to that attention before it fades. While most fighters spend their prime years chasing belts, a few quietly build machines that keep earning long after the gloves come off. They don't ask how much the fight pays, they ask what the fight can build. No modern example is clearer than Conor McGregor. McGregor understood early that fighting was only one chapter of the story. Every walkout, every interview, every headline was designed to point somewhere else. When he launched his whiskey brand, he didn't attach it to fighting results. He attached it to identity. confidence, success, defiance. The brand lived independently of wins and losses. Even when he wasn't fighting, the business was working. He turned personality into infrastructure. McGregor didn't wait until retirement to think like an owner. He used his peak relevance to build assets that did not require damage to maintain value. That decision alone separated him from dozens of champions who earned millions but built nothing. The cage amplified him, but the business freed him. He understood that money earned with your body expires. Money earned with ownership does not. Long before branding was fashionable, George Foreman executed one of the smartest pivots in sports history. Foreman understood trust. He didn't sell aggression. He sold reliability. His image as a disciplined, humble former champion translated perfectly into consumer confidence. The product was simple, but the strategy was not. He turned credibility into a household empire that quietly out-earned his entire boxing career. He didn't sell fights anymore. He sold trust. Foreman's brilliance was patience. He didn't chase trends. He didn't overextend. He allowed the business to mature while he stayed consistent. That restraint is rare in fighters. Most chase excitement. Foreman chased longevity, and longevity is the real victory. Then there is Ronda Rousey, who understood that relevance has a shelf life and moved while hers was highest. Rousey didn't wait for decline to pivot. She leveraged peak fame into entertainment, acting, media, and professional wrestling. Each move extended her brand without extending physical damage. She exited violence before violence exited her. Rousey's transition was not accidental, it was timing. She recognized that fighting had opened doors, but staying too long would close them. By stepping into other industries early, she protected her future and diversified her income. She didn't chase nostalgia, she chased expansion. These fighters shared one discipline most never develop. They separated ego from strategy. They did not confuse applause with security. They treated fighting as capital, not identity. Every smart business move they made had one purpose: to detach income from injury, because no empire should depend on how much pain you can take. Most fighters burn everything they earn trying to look successful. These fighters built systems that made success quiet, stable, and permanent. They didn't need comebacks. They didn't need to fight at 40. Their money didn't ask them to bleed. That is what beating the game really looks like. At some point, the smartest fighters stop asking how much they can take and start asking how long they want to live well. This is the invisible line that separates men who survive the sport from men who are consumed by it. Talent does not create this separation. Discipline does. Ego control does. Long vision does. Because intelligence in fighting is not about damage. It is about restraint. Khabib Nurmagomedov built his entire career on delayed gratification. While others chased luxury during their rise, Khabib lived simply, trained relentlessly, and treated money like a tool, not a reward. He understood that excess weakens focus. His discipline was not just physical, it was financial, emotional, and strategic. When his career ended, there was no lifestyle to maintain, no pressure to return. He didn't retire into fear, he retired into control. Khabib never confused fame with freedom. He avoided distractions, ignored validation, and kept his circle small. That mindset allowed him to walk away without regret. He didn't need to protect an image built on luxury. His brand was built on consistency and values. That made it portable. He carried his power with him instead of leaving it in the cage. Then there is Andre Ward, a fighter whose intelligence was never loud. Ward approached boxing like a chess match and life the same way. He educated himself, studied contracts, and understood that longevity mattered more than headlines. While others chased risky super fights, Ward evaluated cost versus reward. When the balance shifted, he left. He respected the sport enough to leave before it disrespected him. Ward's mindset was rooted in patience. He didn't rush to spend. He didn't inflate his lifestyle to match his fame. That restraint gave him options when the fighting stopped. Commentary, analysis, business all became viable because he had not burned himself out chasing validation. He chose sustainability over spectacle. Quietly, Gennady Golovkin embodied the same philosophy. Rarely flashy outside the ring, disciplined inside it, Golovkin avoided excess and stayed focused on fundamentals. He did not let fame pull him into chaos. His career was methodical. His earnings protected, his reputation intact. Silence became his strategy. These fighters understood something deeply uncomfortable. The sport does not reward loyalty, it rewards usefulness. Once you accept that, you stop giving it more than it deserves. You stop fighting for validation. You stop spending to impress. You stop trusting the crowd to protect you. You begin protecting yourself. Most fighters are addicted to the noise, applause, attention, excitement. These men learned to live without it. They trained their minds the same way they trained their bodies. Discipline first, emotion second, vision always. That is why they exit calmly while others collapse loudly. This mindset separation is not visible on highlight reels. It does not trend, it does not sell tickets, but it decides who lives well after the sport is done. The fighters who beat the game were never the loudest. They were the most prepared, because the quietest exits are usually the smartest ones. For every fighter who escapes with control, there are dozens who fall into the same trap, not because they were stupid, but because the sport rewards the wrong instincts. Fighting teaches aggression, urgency, and dominance. Business punishes all three. The habits that create champions inside the cage quietly destroy them outside of it. The same fire that builds them burns them down. Mike Tyson is the most famous example of talent outrunning structure. Tyson had everything fighters dream of: youth, power, fame, and money arriving faster than wisdom could catch up. He spent like the spotlight would never dim, trusted people who spoke softly and took loudly, and confused excess with success. His problem was never earning money. It was keeping it. He won the world, but lost control of it. Tyson's downfall was not unique, it was amplified. He lived the lifestyle most fighters chase when they finally feel seen. Mansions, entourages, constant stimulation. No breaks, no plan. When the fighting slowed, the spending didn't. The sport moved on and the infrastructure collapsed, because chaos is expensive and discipline is boring. Then there is Roy Jones Jr., one of the most gifted athletes to ever step into a ring. Jones had speed, reflexes, intelligence, and a resume few could match. But instead of leaving early, he stayed. He chased the feeling. Each fight took more than it gave. By the time he stopped, the damage had accumulated and the leverage was gone. He didn't lose skill first, he lost timing. Jones believed he could outrun decline, a mistake many great fighters make. The crowd still cheered, but the risk had shifted. He traded long-term security for short-term relevance. The sport let him, because the sport always does. It never tells you to stop. In MMA, BJ Penn represents a different version of the same failure: natural talent without structure. Penn could win without discipline, which made discipline feel optional. Success came easily, so preparation felt unnecessary. Over time, that mindset caught up with him. Losses piled up. Opportunities vanished. The game moved forward while he stayed still. Talent without order collapses under pressure. These fighters were not foolish. They were misaligned. They treated fighting success as permanent instead of temporary. They spent for identity instead of investing for freedom. They trusted instinct in a domain that requires patience. And the sport does not forgive that. The brutal truth is this: most fighters fail at business because business requires the one thing fighting never taught them: restraint. Knowing when not to swing, knowing when not to spend, knowing when to walk away, even when the crowd begs you to stay. Power without control always turns inward. This contrast is essential. It shows why the fighters who beat the game are so rare. They did not just fight differently, they thought differently. They resisted the very instincts that made them dangerous competitors. And that resistance saved them. When you line the smartest fighters side by side, a pattern emerges that has nothing to do with punching power or win streaks. These men did not escape by luck, they escaped by design. Each of them understood the system they were in, then positioned themselves so the system worked for them instead of against them. They didn't fight the machine, they learned how it was built. Look at Floyd Mayweather, Conor McGregor, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and George Foreman. On the surface, they could not be more different. Different eras, different personalities, different fighting styles, but underneath, they shared the same operating system. They all understood leverage. They knew when attention was highest. They knew when to speak and when to stay silent. They knew when to take risk and when to lock things down. None of them trusted the sport to protect them. They trusted preparation. That is why none of them needed desperate comebacks. None of them needed to chase relevance at 40. They exited while the door was still open. Another shared trait was selectivity. These fighters did not say yes to everything. They said no far more often than they said yes. No to bad deals, no to unnecessary fights, no to lifestyles that required constant income. They understood that every yes carried hidden costs: energy, focus, health. Discipline was their greatest asset. They also built identity beyond competition. Mayweather was not just a boxer, he was a brand. McGregor was not just a fighter, he was a spectacle. Khabib was not just undefeated, he was principled. Foreman was not just powerful, he was trustworthy. When the fighting stopped, the identity remained. That identity became currency. Perhaps most importantly, they were not addicted to applause. They did not need the crowd to confirm their worth. That detachment allowed them to think clearly when others panicked. When fame dipped, they did not chase it. When opportunity came, they were ready. Emotional control created strategic advantage. This is why these fighters beat the system. Not because the system was fair, but because they were prepared. They treated fighting as a temporary role, not a permanent identity. They used the sport instead of letting the sport use them. And when the final bell rang, they were already somewhere else. When the noise finally fades, when the highlight reels stop looping and the crowd moves on to the next name, only one question matters: who is still standing with control? Not physically, but financially, mentally, and emotionally. This is where the true definition of winning reveals itself. Because victory in fighting is loud, but victory in life is quiet. Look at the men who left the sport without desperation. George Foreman did not need a comeback tour. Andre Ward did not chase nostalgia. Khabib Nurmagomedov did not hover around the cage, hoping for one more moment. They walked away with intention. Their lives did not shrink when fighting ended. They expanded. That is not luck. That is planning. These fighters understood something most never do. The belt is a symbol, not a strategy. Applause is temporary. Fear is expensive. Real success is being able to say no, to walk away, to live without asking the sport for permission. They built lives that did not depend on damage. They made fighting optional. Contrast that with the fighters who stayed too long, the ones who needed one more fight to feel relevant, one more payday to stay afloat. Their careers became negotiations with decline. Their bodies paid the price for delayed decisions. The sport did not betray them. It simply did what it always does. It moved on. The game never waits for anyone. The men who beat the game never believed the cage would take care of them. They took care of themselves. They treated fighting as a phase, not a destination. They respected the danger enough to limit exposure. They understood that masculinity is not proven by how much pain you endure, but by how wisely you navigate risk. Strength without strategy is just sacrifice. This is the final lesson. The smartest fighters did not win because they were tougher. They won because they were disciplined when others were emotional, patient when others were reckless, silent when others were loud. They played the long game in a sport designed to shorten lives. That is real dominance. Some fighters won titles, some won fame. A rare few won freedom. They beat the system not by fighting harder, but by thinking longer. And when their fighting days ended, their lives did not collapse into regret. They moved forward with control, clarity, and peace. Because in the end, the greatest victory a fighter can achieve is not a belt around the waist. It is a life that does not require one more fight to survive.